Hi, this is Duke Ralston from the Reaper's Digest. I want to thank you for listening to the show, and I wanted to ask you to buy the Reaper's Digest a cup of coffee. Just go to Ko-fi.com/tennessemacabre and send us a tip. Thank you again.
Welcome to a night.
Hi, welcome to the Reaper's Digest podcast, the podcast where we dissect the best and the worst in horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. I am Blake Earl.
And I am Duke Ralston.
And we've got a special guest with us tonight.
Hi, I'm Michael Ruther.
Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, let's see. What would you like to know?
Well, I met Mike getting a master's degree in literature.
Yes, creative writing.
Creative writing and master's in editing. So I feel like he is uniquely capable of bringing some light to our topic today. And what is that topic, Duke?
That is the Amityville Horror. One of the most intriguing horror stories, American horror stories of the 20th century.
And a cottage industry all to itself, right?
Yes, in a cottage.
Yeah.
A little bit more than a cottage.
Yeah, I think part of the issue was it was such a big house, right?
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah. So those of you who don't know, you haven't been paying attention to pop culture. The Amityville Horror is a series of books and movies. We're going to be discussing the novel today.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get into the movies later because, good God, there's a lot of them.
There certainly are.
So, just to give you a little bit of background, the Amityville Horror is published in 1977, September, by Jay Anson. So, basically, what happened? The background of the novel. On November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed his entire family, 6 people, at 112 Ocean Avenue in the suburban Amityville on the south shore of Long Island. He was convicted of second-degree murder in November 1975 and sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years life in prison. He died in March of 2021. So, the thing is that DeFeo Jr. claimed he was possessed, that the devil made him do it. Which apparently, or at least apocryphally, according to legend, drove the price of the house down. So in 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children move into the house. After 28 days, they flee, claiming to have been haunted. It was written after Tam Mossman, an editor at the publishing house Prentice Hall, introduced George and Kathy to Jay Anson. They didn't work directly with Anson, but they submitted like 45 hours of tape-recorded memoirs to him, which were used as the basis of the book. They estimate that the book has sold around 10 million copies at this point, which is... it makes it a big seller.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were also several sequels to the book. Which, the thing that gets me is, this thing was supposedly based on true story, right?
Right.
And so that was the big selling point when it came out.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that, because whether or not it's a true story is debatable.
Yes.
So, the book describes the house at 112 Ocean Avenue as remaining empty for 13 months. In December 1975, George and Kathy buy the house at a bargain price of $80,000. Now, adjusted for inflation, that is some number I don't know.
Oh, actually, do you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in 1970, in the mid 1970s dollars, 80,000. This was about 466,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so I looked this up, and one of the things that was particularly noteworthy to me as far as the money part was Kathy Lutz in the book mentioned being excited by the price and thinking that it was like a typo, like they left a 1 off. She was expecting it to be for 180,000, and that would be almost 1.1 million in today's dollars, today's value.
Wow.
Okay.
So it's a 5-bedroom house in the Dutch colonial style, with a swimming pool and a boathouse, and located on a canal. It's got the distinctive gambrel roof. It's got like those 2 windows that look like eyes.
The half moon kind of.
Yeah, the kind of half moon windows, or quarter moon, as it were. So, George and Kathy married in July of 1975. Each had their own home, but wanted to start fresh. Kathy had 3 kids from a previous marriage: Daniel, Christopher, and Melissa. They also had a Malamute Labrador Retriever dog named Harry. During the first inspection of the house, a real estate broker told them about the DeFeo murders and asked if this would affect their decision. They decided it was not going to. They're not superstitious people, right? They make a big point in the book of saying that.
Yeah.
The Lutz family moved in December 18th. Much of the DeFeo's family furniture was still in the house because it was included for $400 as part of the deal, which, even in today's money, that's a steal. You know? A friend of George Lutz learned about the history and insisted on having it blessed. This is when the Catholic priest comes in. Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic. George was a non-practicing Methodist. George knew a Catholic priest named Father Ray who agreed to come carry out the blessing. The real-life priest is referred to as Father Mancuso for privacy reasons. All right? So
Okay.
Mancuso was a lawyer, judge of the Catholic court, and psychotherapist. Blah, blah, blah. He arrives to perform the blessing while they're unpacking. When he flicked the first holy water and begins to pray, he hears a masculine voice demand that he get out. That's probably the most famous scene, right? The get out. When leaving the house, Father Mancuso does not mention the incident. On December 24th, 1975, he calls George and Lutz, advised them to stay out of the second floor room where he had heard the mysterious voice, the former bedroom of Mark and John DeFeo that Kathy planned to use as a sewing room. That will be important. The sewing room comes up again and again. So, basically, the priest gets sick. He gets blisters on his hands, stigmata. George and Kathy are kind of at each other's throats this whole time. But it's pretty normal. By mid-January, after another attempt at blessing the house by George and Kathy, they experience what would turn out to be their final night. They declined to give an account of the events because it was apparently too frightening. After getting in touch with Father Mancuso, the Lutzes decided to take some belongings, stay at Kathy's mother house in Deer Park until they sorted out the problems. They claimed that the phenomenon followed them there. And the final scene of Anson's book, which scared the crap out of me when I was a kid, was this green-black slime coming up the staircase towards them.
Yes.
So they left all their possessions behind, fled. Obviously, something happened in the house because you don't just take off.
Right.
You know? So I don't know what. Let's start with that. With the idea of it being true to life.
Okay.
You think that affects the novel?
Absolutely. When I read it in '79. And of course, it come out in 77, but it really got popular in 79. PR kicked in. And I remember walking into my 7th grade classroom, and literally every kid had a copy of the Amityville Horror sitting on their desk. Everybody was reading.
There you go.
Because it was a true to life story.
Mm-hmm.
Little side incident. There's a house here in South Pittsburgh with a gambrel roof and windows very similar to the one on the Amityville Horror house that I had to walk past to get to baseball practice, which explains why I'm not in the major leagues today. It was scary. And the fact that you couldn't laugh it off, like, say, Jaws or a book like that, and say, this isn't a real story, made it doubly scary.
So, there's a grand tradition in horror of claiming that something is based on true story.
Right.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes to mind.
Yes.
Based on a true story.
Right.
No, it's not.
No, of course not. No.
Yeah. It was based on Ed Gein, I believe. Yeah. It was based on Ed Gein being a grave robber, and that was it. That was the true story part. Leatherface, the Sawyer family, all that stuff made up, right? So I wonder, it's been debunked, right?
Yeah, it was debunked. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just gonna say I haven't done a real intensive degree of research, but just from a pretty cursory glance, there was a lot of things that are just verifiably false. Apparently, like one of my favorites personally was I kept mentioning the Psychical Research Institute in Raleigh, North Carolina. Near as I can figure, no such place has ever existed. I couldn't find any website for that. The Wikipedia had a whole list of instances of how claims were debunked. Things like they said there was pig footprints in the snow, but it didn't even snow that day. A lot of little things like that. The footprints in the snow really freaked me out when I was a kid. And then finding out that was made up. One, I think it's interesting. Do we discount this because it's not a true story? Well, here's the thing that I think is kind of interesting as far as the lens that we're reading this through. We all have the experience of having read this as children, basically. Preteens. I think I read it when I was like 13, 14, something like that. That's what you said as well, Duke, right? 13?
Yeah, 13.
And that's, I think, at a time where as much as we may have been coming into an idea of skepticism, there's still so much we know we don't know about the world around us. And just like having the stamp of it being a true story, I think if you take that away, it loses so much, because now having had the experience of reading it as an adult, looking back at something that has been debunked, or for the most part, people more or less roll their eyes at, a true story. It's.
So do we look at it as a work of fiction now? Is that the? Does it have to be a true story to be worth anything?
I think where I was going is, if it's not, it needs to be better. It needs to be better.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think, okay, so I don't know what I believe about it, because it was debunked probably a couple of years after the big hype and hysteria. I remember I was still in high school, and I'm like, thank God this was faked up. And the people said that the priest was in on it. I think the priest is a big deal. The Lutzes were, of course, in on it. So that was they said that it was all manufactured. Well, then, many years later, some folks come back and said, wait a minute, this was not all manufactured. Their memory was not perfect, but this wasn't all manufactured. So I don't know where I'm at on it. I just don't know. I can tell you one thing, I'm not spending the night in Amityville.
I don't think I could do it just because of the movie.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I
Yeah.
was a spooky little kid. I was easily scared.
Yeah.
So like this book terrified me. I think I read it at like 10 because
Mhm.
nobody monitored what I read.
Yeah.
You know, my parents were just like, oh, book,
Mhm.
good. And
I definitely got away with a lot because of the whole at least he's reading
yeah,
sort of vibe, you know.
yeah, I read The
Yeah.
Stand at like 12.
Oh, I was reading a lot of Stephen King when I was
Yeah,
little.
yeah.
I grew up as a small child. There was a book that came out called The Bell Witch of Tennessee. And so I grew up with friends of my father's mounting expeditions to Adams, Tennessee, and the Bell Witch Cave and the Bell Farm and things. So I kind of grew up with this stuff. Dad was worse than any child you would ever imagine. And so he probably bought the book for me and read it first, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. But what I was going to say was, you know, it made such an impression on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think half of it was the true story, but the other half is, it is it's nicely timed out. Say what you will
Yes.
about the book, but it does
Mhm.
have that ticking clock.
Mhm.
You know, they don't have long in that house.
Right.
You know,
Well,
that's the back of the book. That's the dust jacket. 28 days later, they're gone.
yeah,
if you look at this thing from the point of view of a total skeptic, and let's say that the Lutzes and Father Mancuso, I know it wasn't his real name, Father whatever he was, let's say they got together in 74 and said, you know what, we're not making enough money, I've got this idea. And they planned all this out, because if you can definitely read it that way. We've got two people that are not particularly religious, yet they call a priest in to do a house blessing not once but twice.
Yeah, I was going to definitely circle back to that for as much as they have, you know, in some instances sort of been generally dismissive of religion, they do have a very close relationship with members of the clergy.
Yes.
that didn't even dawn on me.
Yeah.
And so much of the account of spooky weirdness is basically them playing phone tag.
Yep.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They try
That
to pick up
priest-
and get static. They get a dial tone. They, you know, it just rings and rings. On the other end, the same thing's happening. They can't talk to each other, and you know, I think we live in a more telecommunication saturated context where it's easy to just kind of go big whoop, you know.
Yeah.
You know, could you imagine if this happened today? They would have just gotten a text from the priest that said "sewing room bad."
with a frown emoji.
Yeah. Little frowny face. Maybe. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to kind of qualify. I just sort of said it should be better, and it doesn't seem sort of fair to not address that.
Yeah. Let's get into that. What was your
yeah.
general take on the book?
I think that, like you said, the pacing is good for the most part. I mean, it definitely drags in you know, long descriptions of phone tag, of course, but there's not a real lot of characterization. These people aren't very easy to see three-dimensionally, I don't think. We don't know a real lot about them. One thing that they do keep coming back to is the transcendental meditation. Even at one point asking, could this transcendental meditation be inviting dark forces? You know, maybe not quite so blatant as that, but almost that blatant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like
Well, it's interesting because I think that lack of characterization
mhm.
actually adds to the marketability.
Yes.
You know, there's the idea of the Mary Sue.
Mhm.
Mary Sue being a character that's overly powerful, like a stand-in for the writer. You know, you see it a lot in fan fiction.
Mhm.
Could this be the opposite, like a Jane Doe?
Mhm.
Like, it could be any one of us.
Well, that's what I was thinking about, this lack of characterization. When we think of characters that stuck with us, it's never going to be George and Kathy Lutz.
No.
And if we think about this as a recounting of events, actual reporting, then the fact that the whole book almost is told in summary rather than scene isn't quite so bothersome. If we take that away from it, then my immediate demand as a reader is to know more about these people and who they are, and the more specific nature of their fear. You know, it's like they don't really matter to me, but at the same time, you know, cottage industry, like we were talking about before, there's so many movies about the Amityville Horror. There's so many sequels to the books. There's so many fiction and nonfiction alike.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's kind of it is a pretty bad novel, but it's an excellent long newspaper article.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. So it depends. If we're looking at it through a pure literary standpoint, it doesn't hold up, right?
No.
But if we're looking at it as a cultural artifact,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting peek at the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely a vehicle to tell any haunted house story that you want. I mean, it's on defiled ground.
Uh-huh.
It's got a tragic history.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a family starting out with, you know, money problems, which, you know, I think is like a really sort of a strange way to characterize people who are still, near as I can figure, still making payments on their boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know.
I mean, they're definitely getting a deal on the house, and that's something that I really thought about a lot. I mean, if it needs to be a filter, it needs to be a filter on Zillow, like just tragic history slider, like just how bad is it? How much haunted can you tolerate, and how much does that impact the price? Because I think they're getting, you know, more than half off what is basically a mansion. I can live with a little bit of blood in the walls.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like having a roommate. Cuts down the cost. There's someone else there. They're not necessarily living there, so to speak, but
More.
They're not ghost folks.
Picking up the expenses.
yeah.
They're not ghost folks. We prefer to call them undead Americans.
Yeah.
Right. It is interesting to think about how front-loaded the haunting is.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I were reading this and it was just a piece of fiction,
Mm-hmm.
I would have to say pick a lane. You know? Is it defiled ground? Is it the murders? Is it the satanic sacrifice in the basement?
Mm-hmm.
Because the room in the basement is the most interesting cause to me. The Hell Mountain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think this kind of house really exists? Like, with this much tragedy, they wouldn't just bulldoze it?
I mean, they changed the address.
They did change the address.
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer 112 Ocean Avenue.
Is it not?
No, they changed it.
What's it now?
Oh, I don't remember.
That's too bad. I was planning a. Oh, they should make an Airbnb.
I'm pretty sure you could look it up. I'm pretty sure.
I have
information is
known.
out there.
Yeah.
I have known some houses to exist that had a pretty rocky history. Okay, had a lot of things going on, several a murder and a suicide, and you know, the one fact here's why I bounce around like a ping pong. You can't get away from the murders that occurred there. That's an actual fact.
That is an actual fact.
The
DeFeo murders are very real.
The DeFeo murders were very real. It seems to me like I have a hard time believing that these people cooked this up lock, stock, and barrel from the get-go. I think there had to be some activity there. So I kind of bounce around on it. I look at this outline, and it's like, man, if I was going to make up a story and sell a novel and get rich doing it, this is the way to go.
True story. The true story angle.
True story angle.
True crime sells.
It sells, baby.
One of the first things that happens from a their behavior is changing standpoint is they beat the kids with like implements, like you said, a strap and a spoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They beat the shit out of them.
They also mention a close relative has $1,500 that they had laid by for a special circumstance go missing.
Yeah.
Which, adjusted for inflation is some kind of small fortune. It's like, I don't know, just $5,000, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Just lose.
That's a lot to lose.
That's a lot to lose.
To just lose out of your pocket when you're visiting your in-laws.
It's a lot to carry in your pocket, but yeah, it's a lot to lose out of your pocket.
So, I don't know. I'm not trying to throw away any kind of accusations, doing a lot of armchair investigating years and years later, but there is some, money going missing between family members and some kid whooping.
Yeah.
That maybe a little bit of demon possession might just, forgive a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're just covering up being really terrible. Just oh man, we beat the kids within an inch of their life. The devil made me do it.
Sometimes you wake up feeling like you owe someone an apology, and sometimes you just paint the toilets black. Hope for the best.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do next time I have too much to drink. I'm just going, I was possessed.
I was possessed, yes.
The spirit of Jack Daniels took me over.
There's just a million fishy things about it.
Yeah. But here's one that always strikes me odd. If these folks were doing this for notoriety and money, they disappear. You don't see George and Kathy Lutz. I believe they're still alive, aren't they?
I believe so.
You don't see them?
File that under something we should have looked up.
Yeah. The priest, I'm pretty certain the priest has died, but the priest, they changed they gave the priest a pseudonym, and the Lutzes just kind of disappear off the face of the earth. Now, were they raking in money off the book? I'm sure they were.
Oh yeah,
but they certainly don't strike as people that have found a get rich quick scheme and are out there trying to make money off of it. Because here's the thing: after the gig is up, you come out and you do the talk show circuit about how you planned all this out, and you write a book about how you did all that. There's ways to make money off of it being a fake. Yes.
So maybe there was a little bit of truth. Maybe they were just covering up being in over their head,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because what you don't realize about a big house like that, it's a lot of upkeep.
Yes.
They keep talking about they have to fix this and fix that. It's a lot of upkeep. So maybe they just got upside down and were like, we got to get out of here. How do we do it and make a profit?
The world's most incredible case of buyer's remorse.
Right.
It's a lot of houses all at once.
Yeah.
Either way, though, whether it's haunted or not, you got buyer's remorse.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
This is a little more haunted than I bargained for.
Yeah.
So I wonder about the haunted house angle. What do you think it is about a haunted house? Let's zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think it is about a haunted house that's so compelling to people?
Well, I don't want to like just immediately zoom right back in, but I think that's kind of why this isn't just the one book or the one movie, but an actual brand, an actual IP, an actual franchise. Is because of how you can just sort of put anybody in there and have a haunted house story. Anybody can be over leveraged in a bad real estate choice, and suddenly there's ghosts. It can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
I think that there's elements of it that make it relatable to a lot of people because it has things that have a lot of fear, moving a whole family, moving to a new place, any kind of adjustment anxiety that entails. It's all going to be bound up in a move, and I think that makes haunted houses a really good sort of vehicle for fear, because they're maybe not always, but very, very frequently they do involve moving in. And then being cornered.
And children.
They're
And
moving
children.
in with children, and then they're cornered because it's not just something you can just dump. I mean, that's one of the things that you mentioned, Blake, that's really kind of amazing about it, is that at the end of it all, they just dump it. They just cut bait on the whole operation. No more 112 Ocean Avenue and all their stuff. We don't want that anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting from like a psychology standpoint, like you said, and you pointing out they have kids. Well, those aren't George's kids.
No.
They are now, but there's a lot of fear there too. And there's also this class consciousness in the novel. We're going to call it a novel. In the book, there's just all this. They talk about class a lot. Like moving up, moving into Amityville is a step up the road, right?
Moving in, and this is something folks may not be aware of. If you are in New York, moving out to the island, it is a sign you've made it.
Okay. I was vaguely, like peripherally aware of that. When I was reading this the second time. But there's a lot of talk about class and money. So there's a lot of fear of like almost like imposter syndrome.
At the same time, though, he's also able to just fuck off from work for like weeks at a time too, which is like sort of strange.
Now that was a time capsule. That's job security.
Like he just straight up didn't go to work for a lot of that time.
And
you mentioned
I know if I miss a day in my job, it's like, hey, you don't work here anymore.
I have to at least explain where I was and what I was doing, I'm sure.
And ghost is probably not
the best explanation.
It's gonna be a hard sell. You're
gonna talk to HR.
The boss ain't trying to get all that paranormal shit.
You mentioned something about the zeitgeist a few minutes ago, and I want to kind of come back to that because this says something about the zeitgeist. Whether this is 100% true or 100% BS, this says something about the zeitgeist of the 1970s that people, I think, miss, because 1980 was a chopping block year. Okay. You get in 1980, Ronald Reagan is elected president. And with Ronald Reagan, you get the moral majority and Jerry Falwell, and the country takes a turn toward religiosity. Prior to that, you might not have had a psychical institute in Raleigh, but you had psychic institutes everywhere. People were open to seances, people were open to Bigfoot, people were open to UFOs. You had magazines dedicated to both subjects. You had people that were, Ouija boards were a big deal. So you had a lot of experimentation with psychic phenomena, the occult, and those types of things that you don't have now.
You're absolutely right, and it's absolutely reflected in the market as well. And there's probably a little bit of chicken and a little bit of egg, but there's a whole lot of Exorcist and Omen.
Yeah.
And
a clamping down.
There's a lot of interest in not just horror in general. I mean, there is a growing interest in horror in general, but also specifically in demon and possession. And you mentioned Ronald Reagan and the moral majority and stuff like that. This was before the satanic panic of the 80s, and
yes.
probably the precursor to it. I mentioned to Blake a few weeks ago about the cover art and the box art for a lot of the adaptations, novels, and the books. Always has like the little devil tail swinging off one of the letters. And,
yes.
And it seemed, it's hard for me to even talk about with a straight face because it just seems so unbelievably cheesy to me now.
Yeah, but back then it was a big thing.
I'm looking at it through a completely different lens, to where like there would be people going through the bookstore, and that would jump out at them being like, oh wow, that's hip and now and dangerous.
Yeah. Yes.
You got to think as the 80s evolved, right? Because horror always been popular. Mm-hmm. It is one of the most enduring genres. Mm-hmm. Especially the haunted house story, because of what we said. The home is supposed to be the safe place, right?
Right.
And you start to see less of the gothic in the late 70s.
Yes.
More of this monster in the house kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because people are moving to the suburbs, they're out of the cities. They aren't as afraid of the cabin in the woods as they are that something can come into their nice, safe, white neighborhood.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Well, I think that's another thing that's interesting about haunted house stuff in general, and also the Amityville Horror as well, is there is a sort of a psychological component, not just inside the house, but how do you trust your senses when you're hearing voices, when you're feeling touched? One of the reasons why things like possession and things like haunted houses have always been particularly affecting to me as sort of subgenres is because there are, it almost always involves characters that don't know for a fact that they're not just going nuts.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the time other people see blood on the walls, by the time other people are hearing the voices, it's usually a much more intense and extreme situation than in the beginning when it was just experienced by one person who was consistently being ridiculed for having these beliefs and ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we're looking at this turning point, 79 being when the movie came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 77, the book, and we'll get into the movie more next time we get together. But one thing to think about is the movie makes it all so much more centered on the house.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The phenomena does not leave the house in the movie.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think that's the turning point from the 70s, where it's more focused on the devilly stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That has attached itself to the family. And then you move into 79, 80, and all of a sudden it's the house. Yeah. The house is a monster in and of itself. It's got a face, for God's sake. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you look at the way morality is depicted in horror throughout late 70s, early 80s, right? Mm-hmm. Who are your two big monsters in the 80s? Freddy
and Jason.
Yep, Jason.
Freddy is an intruder and a demon, right? Jason is, and for my purposes here, Jason's the more interesting because Jason is a moral crusader in a way. What does Jason punish?
Punishes the bad
Sin,
kids.
yeah, he punishes.
Sin.
Yeah, he's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. He's against all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, because it causes irresponsibility and inattention and stuff like that.
yeah. He could be, man. He could be Tipper Gore in a hockey mask.
I was going to say, if you would argue that he's more interesting than Freddy, I think we would have a much longer conversation that has nothing to do with the Amityville Horror.
Yeah, we'll have to table that. We'll come back to it in a couple weeks.
But good
We're
point.
gonna have to talk to that. But
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you're seeing this change even in the same property.
Hmm.
Now, have any of y'all read any of the other books?
No.
I have.
Okay.
They are miserable.
Wow.
Okay.
In what way? Like, qualify that.
Okay, they are definitely a push towards market.
Yeah.
Not written by the original author. Not consistent in tone.
Yeah.
And not based on a true story on the cover. You know what I mean?
Right.
So a lot of those literary sins you forgive in this, you don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
Just
by virtue of being an original.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even though I contend that there probably would be no market for it if it wasn't for the temperature on demons in the suit and that particular flavor of supernatural at the time.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of demonology stuff because society got so secular, and what we're afraid of is that that was the problem.
Yeah. That's very palpable in this novel because you've got Kathy is a non-practicing Methodist, and her husband George is a non-practicing Catholic.
Reverse.
They don't have a problem. They don't have a problem calling a priest in to do a house blessing, but they're not religiously involved. And I think in the 70s, to say that openly was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's not so much after 1980.
I wonder, because I'm not a religious person, and the idea to have my house blessed is just not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It would never dawn on me.
It seemed
Right.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I went to a very religious wedding, right?
Right.
And I had to, the first couple times we walked through what the ceremony was going to look like, I was like, man, this is spooky. And I was like,
Yeah.
So the fact that they're still tied, I guess through the religion of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they grew up around and they're not uncomfortable with it.
Right.
Like I am, having been a-religious for most of my life.
Right.
And
Right.
because of the fact that they have such a close relationship with Father Mancuso, I would say they're probably uncomfortable with the idea of abandoning it completely.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say so too.
So what does this look like if someone is secular? How does a secular person get rid of a ghost?
So for the sake of the illustration, one of our places is haunted.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
When we don't understand, call a priest as a realistic, reasonable option.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
To me, if you are secular, if you are totally rationalist, totally believe in scientific thoughts, you don't believe in ghosts.
Yeah.
So poses a problem for the whole haunted house story.
Yeah.
But my thinking is that you're going to be standing there as the black ooze comes up, going, "Man, there's really something wrong with these pipes."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At some point, obviously, if you're dealing with a really truly haunted house, then at some point you're going to have an epiphany that it's a haint.
Right.
But
The
my
question becomes, how much can you rationalize in real time,
Yes.
on the fly as you go?
exactly that's what I'm beating the bush around. That's exactly it.
I guess I'm quote unquote asking for a friend because no. I'm just- Speaking of which, nobody wants to stay at my house.
Oh dear.
Yeah. At what point do you acknowledge the interference of something that is beyond our normal framework of understanding? At what point do you acknowledge, like, okay, this is something outside of the realm of our understanding of reality? What does that moment look like?
Well, I think
Because for the Lutzes, it was just hauling off and whipping the shit out of their kids.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the discussion is taking this turn in general because it wouldn't have if this didn't say true story on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that even the true story, even though
Like,
we
keep
know,
adapting it and remaking it with new characters.
yeah, even though we know that it wasn't necessarily that this is not 100% true.
Yeah.
Even if something happened, this is not exactly how it went down, right?
Well, it says in the
Right.
epilogue that it's all independently verified.
It does say that.
Yeah.
And also, well, this book says a lot of things. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it sure has a lot of words.
And we're not okay, I got to ask a question. And I can't remember the name of the couple that worked for the church. They're doing the paranormal series of movies about them now.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Ed and
Ed and
Lorraine,
Lorraine,
they were in the
they-
epilogue.
They were involved in this in some capacity, right?
Yeah, they were in the epilogue. They went in to investigate.
Okay.
They went with
Okay.
a group of other big heads.
Okay.
For paranormal investigation, clairvoyance.
Okay.
What a
Is the plural of medium still media?
I believe it's extra large. Sorry, yeah, I don't know. I would say mediums.
Mediums?
Yeah, but what a '70s concept, the Christian psychic,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, that
Yes.
was something that was really interesting to me. They actually brought a clairvoyant in to sort of feel the place out.
Yeah,
At one point, I can't remember her name, but yeah, she did go in and she didn't like it one bit. She was
No. Not a fan.
yeah, no, she was
Yeah.
out of there pretty quick.
Yeah,
Interesting thing, and I think that this doesn't necessarily hold true with Protestantism, but I think with Catholicism, there is a side of the church that's very open to the possibility of the occult and mysticism.
Mhm.
And so it's not unusual to see people like Ed and Lorraine Warren or church psychics or, whatever you want to call it. You don't see that in Protestantism. But
Not
you
until
do see.
get into French Protestantism, like
Well-
what do you call it? Pentecostals.
Oh,
Yeah.
Speaking
Yeah.
in tongues. They can't.
Yeah. But I was thinking more of kind of the mainstream denominational. But you're right. You do get it in some of the Pentecostal and some of the spiritualist movements out in the mountains, typically. So
This is the altitude.
yeah, in the moonshine.
Yeah. The communion
up.
hits a little different up there.
Yeah.
If you get bit by a snake, they will straight up watch you die
yeah.
Yes.
and wait for God to save you.
Yes, they
Or
will.
not.
One of my favorite country songs has a line in it that said, "In a moment of doubt, the venom turned out stronger than my daddy's faith." So, well, I think we're winding down here.
I think we are.
Yeah,
we are.
we're casting stones from glass houses, as it were.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's your overall take on this? We're going to come back next podcast and talk about the movie with Mike again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love that. I'm looking forward to watching a handful of iterations of Amityville Horror. see if we could get a closer look at what is so enduring as a common thread throughout all of these.
Yeah. It's
based on a true story.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, all right. So until next time, what do you have to promote, Duke?
Well, of course, I always want to promote Tennessee Macabre. Folks can catch us on Saturday nights at 10 Central Time on ITV Chattanooga for Roku and Kindle. You can find us on Otherworlds TV for Roku at midnight. Also find us on the Vortex Online, the Monster Channel Online, and Betamax TV on Roku.
All right.
What about you?
I am promoting Blood Oaks, of course.
Of course.
June 21st, our album is going to drop, our EP on Academic Punk Records, North Georgia Death Cult.
Yes.
And it'll be streaming everywhere.
Okay. Good deal. Cannot wait to hear it.
Anything to promote, Mike?
Not at the moment. Top secret. Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
I know you've been working on some stuff, so I didn't know if you're ready to put it out there.
Not quite.
Not ready to push it out of the nest? Gotcha. All right. Well, till next time, take care of yourselves.
Thank you for choosing the Reaper's Digest podcast. Like and subscribe. Recommend us to your friends. Check us out on all social media outlets. We'll see you next time.